Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 75 of the Simpa Life Podcast. It is another wonderful day up here in the Northeast. As you can see behind me, the sun is shining. We're officially into spring, although it is snowing today. So I'm a little bit confused as much as the weather is as to what the hell is going to be going down for the next few days. So it looks like I'm stuck inside. Luckily, for you fine folks, we're going to have one hell of a guest. See the segue there. There was a segue this week, folks, that's going to entertain you while you're stuck inside if you are in one of the currently snow heavy areas, which is quite a few of us, it would seem, in the north of England and Scotland, which is where our guest resides. Another segue. We're doing well here, folks. Today's guest is from Scotland, as you just alluded from my quite hyper intro, who has a background as a professional headline musician and entertainer, whose 2012 affliction with post-viral fatigue syndrome led him to learn all about the endocannabinoid system and cannabis and how that sort of helps. He has since become what I would consider one of the most influential people in Scotland's low-THC, I'm going to say the bad word, hemp industry. And he's also established Highland Hemp Holistics and serves as the current chair of the Scottish Hemp Association. He is Kyle Esplin. How are you doing, man?
Great. Very well. Thanks, Simpa. Thanks for the lovely intro there. It's wonderful to be on the show. Good to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I've just realized kind of how caffeinated I am. I didn't realize until I sat down and gone, ooh, things to do, things to say. You can kind of tell that.
Kicked off well.
Yeah. Okay, we're flowing well. We've got the introductions out of the way. I had 2 segues. That makes up for last week, so probably the absent one we're going to see next week. But I suppose let's jump straight into this. You discovered cannabis because of, well, quite an unusual route, I would say, compared to most, directly as a consequence of developing post-viral fatigue syndrome. So can you sort of tell us about the syndrome and sort of how you acquired it and the path that led you on?
So what I was up to in life, as you mentioned, my background in music and entertainment, I was traveling the world regular. At the time I was living in Mallorca. I'd been there for a couple of years, having a good life, busy in the music industry. And summer of 2012, I was struck down by a respiratory viral infection. It started with unusually heavy symptoms in the chest that didn't feel like a normal cold or viral infection. And within a couple of days, I felt completely floored, and all sorts of crazy symptoms started. My health was deteriorating from that point. Being in show business, as they say, the show goes on. I attempted to rest for a couple of days, see the doctor, take some antibiotics and battle on. And I'll be honest that I think the doctor who I saw down the road in Spain was fairly liberal with his use of antibiotics and things, where you just wouldn't throw them in at the start of viral infections, perhaps usually without checking out what was going on. And I attempted to work again. And then about 10, 14 days or so into where it started, I was in the flat, woke up in the middle of the night, and I wasn't feeling well, and my heart was frighteningly slow. It felt like it was going to stop, and I was measuring it, and it was down below 30 beats a minute. It's like 28, 30 beats a minute, which I've never felt my heart at that rate before. I walked around the apartment and felt strange, a bit sort of lightheaded, and my heart didn't speed up. And I sat down and it was still going so slow. And I lost consciousness for some time. My wife at the time, who was there with me, I came to, who was in a state of confusion from whatever had happened in my heart slowing down and me passing out. So when I saw the doctor, he said, "You probably just got some inflammation in the lungs from the infection, have a steroid injection, rest for a week, and you'll be fine. What have you got on the schedule?" And I said, "Well, in a week's time, I'm going to be traveling, touring, going and recording again, quite a busy schedule." And he said, "Oh, just low dose steroid injection, rest for a week, you'll be fine." And I'd say, "Steroids, are you sure there's no side effects can be from that?" And again, he said, "Oh, it's minimum, you'll be fine." So I had that, rested for a week, felt quite okay, went back to working again. And then over the period of a month, everything completely crashed and went wrong. All sorts of symptoms developed. And with the current situation, post-viral fatigue syndrome, I would say, was quite sort of niche in its reporting and understanding in both the medical community and the patients, because people who suffer from it, they just sort of disappear from life, as opposed to someone you continue to keep hearing from and the troubles they're suffering from. The group's actually known as the Millions Missing, which covers ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. Of people who get diagnosed with ME, the majority, like 80 to 90%, started as a viral infection, and ME is really an alternative diagnosis for post-viral fatigue syndrome. The slight confusion on the name is chronic fatigue syndrome gets used in some countries to describe the post-viral or ME condition, but under the WHO categorization, chronic fatigue syndrome is a let's say a slightly milder form of unexplainable fatigue. The hallmark symptom of post-viral fatigue and ME, and what's showing up with long COVID, which I believe belongs in the post-viral grouping with all the other virals that are in there, is the post-exertional malaise. And this is it's a disproportionate setback, relapse compared to what you were doing. And that's the thing people can't quite understand from the description of fatigue, because everyone's had fatigue or had a bad flu that's put them in bed for a month and felt beaten up. But from that point of it, so it's like that feeling that stays, that's not changing, whether you slept or not slept. And from the point of trying to improve and like gain health, let's say you go walk for 2 minutes and you feel where you need to sit down, this is like enough. If you continue, you're feeling lightheaded or you're pushing yourself. The post-exertional malaise happens where if you don't listen to that signal that I need to stop what I'm doing and just, never mind, it's only been 2 minutes, I need to stop. If you continue to push through it, the relapse is so disproportionate. So let's say in the recovery point, you're up to feeling like walking outside for 2 minutes and you think, I'm going to ignore this feeling and I'm just going to push through to improve and see what happens. And you get slapped down so hard by your immune system that you're then like 2 weeks in bed. And you're like, wow, that extra 2 minutes of walking was not worth that 2 weeks in bed. Yeah. Next time I get that signal to stop, I'm going to listen to my body. So that's the hallmark unusual thing that's beyond the fatigue. It's the inability to respond normally. And there's never any exact, let's say, gearing or point of reference on the day as to what you can schedule in. So, myself, sorry, come back to my story and start covering the condition there, but so I ended up with, I was 3 months off from work from doing music, where my immune system had kicked off and I was getting all these symptoms. But at the time I returned to Scotland. I didn't have much confidence in the doctor I was seeing in Mallorca, and I came back thinking maybe the NHS would have some answers to my problems. So I came back to see my GP here, and that was quite the situation. So I was initially misdiagnosed as probably having just pulled intercostal muscles from coughing following a viral infection. And that's what all the pains and bizarre symptoms and stuff was going on from internal injuries of the muscles. So I was sent to a physiotherapist, told to stretch, told to take ibuprofen 3 times a day for 6 weeks, damaged the gut balance further from where I was at. At this point, 3 months in, I wasn't feeling well, but I thought I should attempt to go back to work. And I was joining a cruise ship in Morocco to do a gig crossing the ocean on the way to Miami. And I transited Morocco. My immune system felt crashed. I picked up something, and then like within 24 hours, I was totally wiped out, in bed, ill. I attempted one show and then I was just not well. I had to cancel the rest. I was in the middle of the ocean with no way to get off or get home. The ship's doctors didn't know what was wrong with me other than so the ship's doctor said, like, I don't know what's wrong with you, but you're very ill, and that erratic heart situation that's going on, you should probably see a cardiologist. So this put in my head that, there's probably something wrong with the heart is the direction here, as opposed to 3 months ago's viral infection, which has passed out of the way, and things have been strange since. So yeah, it was just a right nightmare being put through the health system. So after 6 months of everything else being excluded, and Addison's disease, and being put on heart tests and all sorts, diagnosed with post-viral fatigue syndrome. There's a minimum 6 months of checking everything out to get that diagnosis. A lot of people wait 2 years. Some people are up to 5 years of messing around just to get a diagnosis. And then once you get the diagnosis, the doctor doesn't have a solution anyway. They say, all right, this is the diagnosis and we have no treatment for it. Oh, great. Glad I hung around to find that out. So that was a big distraction of sorts from inappropriate medications, no solution. At the time, they were still actually recommending what's called a graded exercise therapy. And basically that is at the point where you don't feel well, the doctor tells you to keep pushing and push through it. And the data showed that there was some improvement, but everyone's experience was that's killing us. Like there was literally people entered the program with mild fatigue and 3 months later they were in a wheelchair and never walked again. Literally, that's what happened. And I, from my background in doing shows, like I had a lot of experience of doing shows where I should have taken time off, where I traveled, I've flown, but like I've flown to Australia, I've not slept for a couple of days, I've got run down, I've picked up something, but this whole trip is just dependent on this one night show that needs to be done and executed. I'll see it through and recover after type of thing, Yeah. So I was used to the idea of pushing through, and I quickly found out that this was not possible. So I'd said to the doctor, that's not compatible, and I've read other people are having problems. So when I looked into the data, how the data was skewed was if you dropped out from the study, so if you were getting broken and ill and you had to drop out, you were considered as not completing the course. So only those who completed the course were counted. So only the people who actually made it through, those who are broken and they dropped out. So it took 5 years of campaigning from patients I was aware of. It probably been going on for longer, but 5 years later, that was removed as a treatment. And this is like a big success in the patient groups of, wow, they've dropped a treatment that was actually making things worse. Millions spent every year, millions raised. There was a trial for rituximab, which it was based on such a small group of people. It was an offshoot of a cancer trial where they just saw a few people fatigue or ME had got slightly better. To me, it didn't justify a lot of hopes on a 5-year trial. I didn't hold out hopes for it. 5 years later, it didn't go well. Doctor had no solution, was sent through everything to physiotherapist, to the homeopathic department of NHS, like the full suite of departments I was through by the doctor. And at the end of it, it still got all these symptoms, which to cover a little bit of that, because it's hard to understand without articulating it clearly, that it's a multi-systemic syndrome, disease, problem. Mm-hmm. You have all sorts of symptoms associated with the nervous system, heart rate being erratic, tingling of the fingers, hands and feet, temperature issues, the HPA access to the adrenal and the thymus, the body's ability to regulate temperature is completely thrown out, and you can feel like one arm is burning and your leg is feeling frozen cold. It's just really stressful to process being, going from inside the house to outside in the cold air. It feels like it overwhelms your senses to process it. And there's just general dysfunction. Foods that weren't an allergy are now an allergy. You're tired. Even if you have a good sleep, you're still tired. You're tired and you can't sleep. You didn't sleep and you're still not sleeping. It's just total dysfunction. And there's the doctor says, well, we can give you antidepressants. Like, all right, well, there's no evidence that that's going to help anything. And what the doctor said was, well, it can help tone down the inflammation a bit and it can help to sleep. So I said, well, sleep is a massive problem. Like it was literally like down to like 3 hours a night of being a problem, like 5 hours being a good night of broken sleep, despite being fatigued. So I said, to the doctor, can I take these antidepressants just occasionally to sleep? And no, you have to take them all the time. So, okay, so it's just change my chemical profile throughout so I can hopefully sleep a little bit. I've got all these problems, and gut imbalance and all different things. Will there be side effects from this, because there isn't any evidence it's going to cure things. For example, was weight gain going to be an issue from these tablets? Because I felt that metabolically, I didn't recognize the system I was living with anymore. My energy process, my way I dealt with food wasn't the same. Mm-hmm. So the doctor confirmed that, weight gain was a likely symptom of these tablets. And I've got, let's say, metabolic problems as it is with the condition. So I asked the doctor, are the tablets high in calories? And the doctor looked confused. They're like, well, what are you asking? Are you joking? So I said, well, what's the mechanism of action as to why I would be gaining weight? Why would you be gaining weight if I'm not consuming extra calories? Can you explain that? And the doctor couldn't. So I said, well, to me, that sounds like a negative downstream consequence on my metabolism with no evidence it's going to bring me back to health. I've seen people who are suffering 10, 15, 20 years with this condition on these tablets every day. They're not changing. That now seems a sort of stuck situation. I'm not going down that road. So I felt at that point, myself and the doctor and the medical system, we were parting ways, and I was going independent and comfortable with that.
Wow. Quite a journey from it. I mean, yeah, it's one of the things you mentioned when we sort of talking in prep of this. I think you mentioned that you've traveled to 67 countries. So, I mean, the lifestyle change, I can't imagine of being that active. I looked at your website, which I'll include in the links below if folks you need to check out to see the galleries and the work that you have done as an entertainer. I had no idea until I obviously went and gave it a Google. But then the narrative that you've just spoke of there, that story of how you've gone from that active to 2 minutes being a thing. Do you know what I mean? I can't imagine psychologically, and I can see in that doctor's eyes, through that doctor's eyes, almost a thing of going, well, if we give him this, maybe they'll be less inclined to go for the other things. And then we don't have to tell them we don't know. And I think I've spoken this quite a few times on this podcast of doctors end up unintentionally with a God complex. They are the gatekeepers to good health. Do you know what I mean? And something they don't know is an affront to that. It's an offense to that, their version of themselves. So I think anybody that presents and causes consequence and trouble and upset to that, they kind of go, try this one, go away. Try this one, go away. You know what I mean? So where did that lead to then, if you then went independent from the health system?
Yeah. So I had started to, I had come across the medicinal benefits of where cannabis and cannabis oil via the sort of the Rick Simpson story, incurable conditions, people having amazing recoveries. I had discovered that amongst my just online research of looking for solutions and finding other stories. So one, that was the idea that, well, if cannabis oil can work for conditions so widely across the board and seemingly unconnected as they are of how it can help, then perhaps it can help this. And when I looked into the research, I got deep into the PubMed database, and I've very much been studying ever since. Really, it's coming up, nearly 10 years, not quite nearly 10 years later. But as I got studying and learned about the endocannabinoid receptor system, how its main purpose is to maintain homeostasis. And to me, in my mind, I was like, wow, a total loss of homeostasis. That would be the best way I could describe the current situation. Rather than listing 50 symptoms for the doctor says, are you sure you could be suffering from, every symptom that seems possible? Just a complete dysfunction, a loss of homeostasis, a loss of my body's ability to interact normally with the environment and hold itself together. Like, that resonated with me as, well, that makes sense. So, I started reading more about that. The mitochondria, which is also, that's known to be involved in the ongoing situation with post-viral fatigue syndromes and ME. The mitochondria is involved in any energy production, the CB1 receptors on the mitochondria. The HPA access the regulation, the sort of the circadian rhythms, all of those controlled by cannabinoid signaling and the rhythm. So it made complete sense. And my GP was was pretty good for conversation. My GP was fine. Didn't have the answers, but was fine for conversation, and would listen to any things I brought up. So I think that would have been at the last meeting, but the antidepressants were. Asked the doctor, have you heard about the endocannabinoid receptor system? I've been researching this, and the doctor said no, and that's when it clicked in my head. It was like, oh wow, there's more cannabinoid receptors in the brain than there is dopamine and serotonin combined, and you're handing out all these pills affecting dopamine, and you don't even know about this receptor system. It was discovered in the late 80s or 1990 or so. That I feel comfortable going on my own from here, so I'm going to look into this. And that was around the time. So that was it was probably the end of 2012, where I was completely confined to a house. And as you say, I mean, the change in lifestyle was completely drastic. I had a great life of traveling the world, going to good places, doing what I loved in the entertainment industry, what I'd worked so hard to be doing, and all that just cut off. And the hardest thing was actually not being able to even enjoy music, like the sensory stimulation, just literally like having to be where you feel so ill that you need to be sort of in a dark, quiet room. It's like that feeling that doesn't change, like that becomes the new normal, and it's like you never adapt to. Oh well, I'll just accept that and get on. Like it bothers you as it would any time. So the drastic change of that, I was confined to, and also I hadn't spent time in Scotland really for 10 years before. I mean, it'd been off elsewhere. I was literally just in and out to Scotland for some visits in between. Exotic travels, and then moved to Mallorca.
I suppose the climate difference as well. How did that impact the illness? Did you feel worse being in the cold of Scotland compared to the warmth of Spain?
It didn't help. The Scottish weather didn't help. Coming back in winter for sure. No, I enjoyed being in Mallorca for sure. Actually, winter time in Mallorca up in mountain areas is a bit colder and damper than you expect it could be, but generally that's sort of 9 months of the year, very pleasant place to be, and generally for chest infections and that I'd rather be than Scotland. But had a warm, dry house in Scotland anyway to recover and be in, but say it's just complete change. So my focus was just 100% of my energy was into like researching and trying to find solutions and taking in lots of information, lots of research, and trying to find the gems and taking in other people's stories, other people's experience, and trying to, make sense of it, because I really felt it was a fork in the road. Like it wasn't just something that you could hang about and wait 5 years and some cure would turn up and bring you back to what was. Like that's 5 years down the road, things change in that time, your body goes, your epigenetic changes, other things set in, and the secondary consequences. So I was comfortable, as in the doctor seemed no further informed in the situation than I could figure out myself. I started to hear about the Charlotte's Web story coming over from Colorado and CBD extract. And at that time, I initially got some CBD oil that had been some of the very earliest stuff that I think some American companies were actually selling from a Chinese source before, and it was early on. It was a grade of its own. I don't know. I wouldn't recommend it, but some stuff had turned up, and I just had the feeling, no, this is not what I'm looking for. So I looked focused on Holland as being somewhere that might hold the solution. Looking for a clinic. And I tracked down Wernerd Bruning in Holland. So Wernerd, who was, as you know, started the Mellow Yellow, the first coffee shop back in the day, and he had Positronics, which was either one of the earlier seed companies, and he had I think online hydroponic stores in Holland, and then he set up the first THC clinics from the 90s in Holland, and then he was the first guy I could track down in the European scene who had CBD dominant extract. So Werner was running a clinic in Haarlem, just outside Amsterdam, sort of in combination with it was Werner's own operation, but I met him first along with Noel Van Schaik at Noel's Indica Willie Wortel's place, and they had a doctor come to see patients, and they had basically the THC dominant, pretty much a strong THC, a weaker THC, and a CBD dominant, so the oils like that. And I had a combination of the different oils, and I mean, within a few days or so, I could feel it was the start of allowing my body to recover. It was like it toned down the symptoms in my system. The reason I'd gone to Holland as well, let's say the legality of the UK situation aside, just I was so ill and hypersensitive to things that I wasn't before. I just wasn't up for going too far off the beaten track if it could help it, type of thing. I was trying to figure out the best option. So I tracked this down, and the CBD oil at the time. So this would have been. Charlotte's Web story came out, and then it was like European farmers realized that they also had the CBD that they hadn't been extracting. They didn't realize there was a market or a demand for this. And I think Werner was in there early, and it was good. It was a golden CBD oil. Not always with any set analysis of exactly. It was more weight to milliliter of extract that went into the bottles, but it was quality extract. And it was quite a sort of prophetic moment. I remember Werner, like late 2000, it was about autumn 2013, where he was in Noel's Willie Wortel's place, holding this bottle of golden CBD oil in the air, and he's saying, "Kyle, 5 years from now, the whole world will be talking about this." And it totally was. It was the unfolding. So Werner had been at it for some time. He helped me a lot, and I'd stayed there for a few short trips, and I ended up sort of going back and forward, so every 3 months or so. And that was then the start of also bringing back more CBD oil or bringing back extra CBD oil, and then other people hearing about me recovering and talking to people, and that being an introduction to how I ended up getting into the CBD industry. And Holistic Highland Hemp is the company that I run now, being involved in a couple of things. So that was the background there. And some of those CBD whole plant, let's say from the hemp, we'll come to the hemp terminology shortly, Simpa, but the hemp extracts, they actually, when done right and when not messed up by purification and all those things, like when it's just a quality plant extract, even from some industrial varieties, if the extract's done right, that high levels of beta-caryophyllene, like they can be really spicy and high levels of beta-caryophyllene, and that's like they can be really good at controlling immune problems and immune issues. So although there's the obvious benefit to having the other CBD superior genetics available, and then more THC is often an improvement for most conditions for a lot of people to, let's say, take things up to the next therapeutic level. In those whole plant hemp extracts, there was definitely something that was very valid about them being available, which I was passionate about. And the first time I discovered what I came to find to be a CBD isolate type product, I felt like I'd been scammed. And this thing was lab tested, and I was in a situation where I remember I had these capsules that were 5 milligram CBDA and 5 milligram CBD, and it was like whole plant, but from hemp, so low on the trace THC, and then a 50 milligram CBD made from isolate. And so let's say it's 10 milligram on one side of the whole plant, 50 milligram of the isolate. And the isolate at the time, you were paying like 5 times more to get that CBD milligram. And I was like, wow, it's just maybe the 50 milligrams maybe on par with the 10 milligram whole plant. Like that was the difference it felt to me, but I was paying 5 times more at the time. Obviously, isolates dropped in price, but like, yeah, it doesn't sit well with me how that's unfolded for the industry. A lot of people who come to CBD have not had that experience like the early days when there was some of those just wilder hemp extracts being extracted with different pressures, different methods, different trace amounts being left. And also the acidic profiles as well, like the raw low temperature extracts, where it would be dominant in acidic cannabinoids. That I can't say for sure that it's the acidic cannabinoids that is a benefit, or is it the lack of process that preserves the other flavonoids and other things that get further damaged as you decarboxylate or winterize and do further refinement process. But like low temperature hemp extracts, you know, just for low temperature plant extracts that haven't been fully activated for their cannabinoid potential, I also saw a great therapeutic value in. And I saw value in the different ones. I would take a range of different things, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, you obviously, as you say, quite fortunate, quite lucky to have been there, I guess, in the early days of this. Obviously, it's quite ironic in that CBD, I think, was first formulated and categorized in 1920s, 1930s, somewhere around that time, prior to the American marijuana with a H tax and everything that followed that's created, obviously, the current climate that we find ourselves in. It's interesting. Obviously, we're going to go on to the hemp thing in a minute. So obviously, I'm just going to use your terminology just to make it easier for this. So yeah, these hemp extracts, as you speak of, something that we spoke of previous to this, and something you and I have kind of batted back and forth quite a few times at various events over the years, is about the understanding of the profile of hemp. So some of these first cultivars that were then being experimented for the higher CBD profile that then weren't tested as stringently as obviously legislation and regulation means they have to today, means that they will have had higher profiles of THC, but also higher profiles of much more expressive and what would I would deem now much more uncommon cannabinoid profiles, as you were speaking of before, of as I'd pronounce it, beta-carotene, but I'm quite a northern, so it's quite brutal sounding. But as a terpene, we're seeing that as an effect to offset kind of what would be considered paranoia or kind of intrusive thoughts. It's having some sort of mechanism towards an antipsychosis mechanism with CBD, which is what we're seeing from various studies. Obviously, some of those studies are done with isolate, some are done as whole plant. The whole plant seems 9 times out of 10, if not more, to be the superior product. And it is, as you say, these other minor components in that, in these broader range products, these full spectrum products. So what I wanted to kind of talk to you about then is where we're at sort of now. We're in a reductionist mentality where if you went back to your same doctor, they'd be like, oh yeah, I know cannabis. There's THC in the CBD and you need this amount of CBD and this much THC. But then there's no conversation about these terpenes, these sequestered terpenes, the flavonoids, the other minor, even some of the chlorophyll, the heavier components of the actual plant material itself. We know when extracted and taken for correct symptom reduction can be quite powerful.
Sure, exactly. And to give a mention to, like, specifically on some of those compounds, like in the flavonoids and thing, flavonoids, cannabis hemp varieties have unique ones, you know, canflavin A and B that are not found in other plants in nature. So it's not just those terpenes that can be, let's say, replaced by other profiles from nature. I don't believe that. And the difference I've seen of, let's say, what a whole plant extract is to further refinement, it's, yeah, for me, the main therapeutic action in the bigger picture is in the whole plant for sure. So we'll cover both the hemp and the medical side in the conversation, but on the hemp side, like I'm really disappointed of the way I was unfolded in the direction towards CBD isolate and things. And I know how it's happened. I've been there along the way to see it happen. But just to roll back a little bit, one thing to give a mention to, like, let's say from sort of 2014, CBD products started turning up in the UK. 15, there was a few more companies available online. It wasn't until sort of the end of 2016 until CBD isolate really even became available for significantly more cost than it is now. And at the time, people were putting it just into for vape and inhalation. Like they weren't prioritizing putting isolate into it. And then there's like this idea by the middlemen of let's invest in this, and this is going to be the golden ticket to being put everywhere throughout the high street. Let's go all in on CBD isolate. And that's really just disbalanced, disturbed what the market started as and its potential. And a lot of people who come to it are not getting that opportunity or understanding in the range of products compared to what they heard about, let's say the Charlotte's Web type story early on, which even that was from a different variety than European hemp. A whole plant thing would be closer to that story than hearing the original story of CBD and now getting a CBD isolate product. It's very different.
Yeah, exactly that. People are then hearing on Coronation Street, they're watching a documentary, they're seeing something by Vice or the BBC or Channel 4 or whatever legacy media outlet people get their information from these days. And they're going, oh, cannabis can do all these things potentially. There's these unique compounds and this is this, and there's a minefield for them to try and understand. But even then, at the end of it, when they can go to a counter and go, oh, what's available? The person that sells them that product can't tell them shit about it, really. They say, this is the product and what we've done to produce it. Oh, how will it affect me? Can't tell you that. How much should I take? Can't tell you that. What other products or system or service do we provide? And it's just the juxtaposition. It's worlds away, and it is because the middle ground was created by middlemen to create middle money, effectively. And they've got so good at it. And through understanding the chemical synthesis of the different compounds, now hemp is king. So this is one of the reasons I'm frustrated by hemp as an industry. And again, I'm using it as the loosest term of the colloquialism that we discuss it as. In the now it's biomass. You create biomass, you extract from your biomass. I mean, you don't even need cannabinoids. You can use quite simple chemistry to turn then cannabinoid terpenes through into branched cannabinoids that you can break down into anything. So this is where the whole THCO, CBDHQ, what else are we on? All these other different ones that have arrived, all the various deltas, and they can skirt around all this legislation while, little THC Delta 9 sat in the corner going, well, when's my time?
Yeah, the ironic thing is, if there hadn't been all that investment in CBD isolate to crash the price of it, there wouldn't have been such a need for so many companies to turn the CBD into Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta 11, and whatever else versions of THC to try and get their investment back, as they were sitting on a bulk amount that was now worth less than they paid for it. And either in the slow road of turning it into consumer end products, or here's a loophole and here's some new products and let's all go all in on this. So I mean, it just so like in the story from my involvement of the early days of the CBD industry, but my recovery, like I got back to maintaining a very high level of functionality I did not expect to get back to, or I'm very grateful that I maintained so without any significant relapse. And I never expected I was going to get back to the option to be traveling and doing shows or things like I used to. And I did get back to that, but on a much lighter schedule and not up for the long haul travels I used to doing things. But then I had the problem, although I could go just for literally a few days at a time, I went for a couple trips, without oil and things, and then had a bit of a setback from it and this, and then just the whole compatibility of that and international and my health, figuring things out. I was doing a bit of that in the CBD industry, let's say, together. Then we had the lockdown from the whole COVID situation kick off. So when the COVID scenario lockdown started, on one side was my diary of entertainment income and thing completely wiped off the books. All of that was cancelled with no sign of change at the time. And then the other side of it was having read about SARS-1, MERS, and knowing about all these other post-virals, like it was in my mind of, hope this is not going to be a terrible unfolding for the nation of like a whole bunch of people being left with a similar situation. So that made me more available to focus on what I've been doing now in the industry here. And so what happened to the Scottish Hemp Association is we've been meeting loosely as some companies prior to this, but then with the lockdown and I was more available on my own before we registered the Scottish Hemp Association, before I became chair, I'd opened up conversations with Food Standards Scotland. Once I realised they had independent legal authority separate from the FSA. I thought, well, I've got to get to work on them. We need to get Scotland going in a different direction on this hemp-based future of CBD products. Have to sort this novel foods nonsense out. So that was the one angle that opened the start of that. There was that I was more available to tackle some things that I was frustrated had not been sorted in the industry prior. And I don't feel a good job had been made about things like the comparisons to THC was always present in hemp seed oil and things, to not have these newspaper headlines creating panic about the same amount of THC in a CBD product as you could get in a litre of hemp seed oil, and there was no panic about that, you know? There was no context given to the consumer in those headlines. So I'd done a lot of research along those lines, and I wanted to contribute, and I realised we had our own authority up here to communicate with. On the side of seeing the direction how that industry was going, and my MP hadn't been, let's say, too interested to talk to a CBD company about their problems and concerns with how that was unfolding, I took it upon myself to literally cold call and email farmers in my area to say that would you be interested to grow hemp? There's one guy in the area who'd done a little trial, and you know, he's not going all in on it. We don't have an industry. We don't have any case to have a processing facility or that. But if we could get more to get this going, there's this future, you could be in the door like early type thing. So I literally called and emailed around all of my farmers in Angus, where I am here. And there was a few called back straight away that, yeah, I'd love to hear more about this, interested in this. So we ended up with 7 farms in Angus growing hemp, like from having none to then there being like 7 and 3 up in Aberdeenshire. So I had this farmers group together. So in my head, this was also sort of parallel with these communications we had with Food Standards Scotland and the way the CBD industry had been perceived, and all this talk about trace THC moving towards isolate. And well, we might as well go on and make some quality full spectrum hemp seed oil here in Scotland that we can, you know, or make the case for the industry to try and show the interest and build on it. So that was the start of the Scottish Hemp Association on that front. Now on the other side, we've got the Rowett Institute at Aberdeen University, who are government funded, and they've actually been doing research on hemp for the last 10 years. And they've been waiting for Scotland to have hemp fields to work with so they could do some more research on local crops and make the case for bringing it into the food supply. Their focus of research is nutrition. And then the second part is the environmental benefits, an alternative protein-rich crop. And there's been human trials done in Aberdeen where they fed volunteers a hemp-based lunch versus a meat-based lunch, and the various blood works that were taken, and the results would indicate that including hemp into the diet could reduce the rate, Scotland's high rate, of non-communicable diseases such as high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, etc. Mm-hmm. So they've been working on that, and I thought this was all sort of coming together nicely, let's say. So I opened up communications with Food Standards Scotland. So for the CBD industry, I was passionate about trying to stop novel foods unfolding. Like that was a big goal. One was introducing the hemp industry of what could be in the unfolding of
To be fair, if you can then hit out 7 farms in your own area, I think that's an achievable ambition.
No. So this made a good case example. So Food Standards Scotland was also then really interested to hear, because actually a lot of them live in Angus nearby. So then to hear that there's all these farms that are now growing hemp around, and it was them who opened up the conversation with a member about having, 1.5 milligram or something in a product or whatever blind trials had been going on. Like there was no trouble being made, but there was just discussions about those issues. To cover that issue, one line which I think sums it up well. And I wrote a piece on this in sort of late 2018, and it's now catching on some of the details more when we're in the industry conversations. But on the way this CBD industry had all this negative press, one, it was going in the direction of it being isolate, and I felt the wrong direction for what products should be. And at the same time, it was getting negative press about any that had any potential trace THC content. Now, if you see a newspaper headline that says concerns about 4 times the illegal level of THC in a product, like, what does that mean to a consumer? 4 times the legal level of THC? Like, I don't know. That's a headline, you know. It makes an impression. There was no consumer context given. So to give that consumer context, when the CMC did the trial of 30 CBD oils on the UK market, I think it was 2018, they took 35% oils. The average THC content was 0.04%. So there was 4 milligram in a 10 ml bottle. Now, based on this, I would say invalid to hemp 1 milligram rule that people talk about in the product container, those specifics aside, they were using that 1 milligram maximum per product, saying this 4 milligram was 4 times over the limit. Now, Germany, which has the strictest food regulation in Europe, allows 5 milligram of THC in a litre of hemp seed oil. And that's on the supermarket shelf with no mention of THC present. So the headline in the newspaper should have said was, blind trial conducted on CBD products in the UK found that CBD products contained less THC than Germany permits in a litre of hemp seed oil. And they've got the strictest food regulation in Europe. That's a completely different context, you know?
Yeah, context is always important. As you say, it's part of what's played into this creation of the polarization and demonization of THC. It's CBD good, THC bad. And it's interesting, the whole CMC study was effectively, allegedly, a lot of the oils that were then selected, very few of them came from the CMC's own ranks. They came from other agencies, which I'm not going to name, but they're obviously obvious to anyone that knows anything that's gone down the past several years. And I think one of them, there was a failure for a heavy metal or something. There was something else that was actually of, oh, just, you know, how bad my hair is behind my headphones. Yeah, there was something of concern. So there was a few things highlighted by it, but the tactic and the undertaking of it at the time was so deliberate, and it was one of the most, it was a cornerstone of the foundation of what we live in as an industry now. It's what led to novel foods, what led to the FSA takeover, was this attacking of the industry. It was a form of just sabotage, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and to give context, even on the hemp seed oil front, recently this has come up from Europe. Europe's went and set a limit for hemp seed oil, which is another disaster for the industry, in my opinion.
Is this IRA or the European Union?
I believe the European Union have set the limit, but IRA would have put out a positive statement about it, simplifying things across Europe. For me, this was another disaster for the hemp industry, for how it should be, and we'll be fighting the case hard in the UK, making the best use of our opportunity to get something different. So Germany had that 5 parts per million, 5 milligram in a litre bottle. They've now made it 7.5 across Europe, but with a threshold up to 10 or 11 ppm, the same as milligram per kilogram, let's say, per litre. So that's in line with Canada, but that's not in line with the historic consumption of hemp seed oil. Now, all our benefits that we know about consuming hemp foods and hemp seed oil, they're long established. It's not like in the last 10 years we've just found out hemp seed. Like, we know it's been consumed for a long time as a beneficial.
Yeah, one of the most historic contexts that I can think of. And hey, Trev Coleman shouting in my ear, going, "Yeah, Oliver Twist, the gruel in Oliver Twist." Always loves to bring that one up. Continue. I just had to get that out because otherwise I'd be hearing him reverbing in my brain there.
Yeah. But on the historical content, so they've set this limit at 7.5 or 10, 11 ppm. Now, there are studies out there that have shown there's been oils produced in Germany in recent years that have had up to 70 milligram of THC in a litre of hemp seed oil, despite having a different limit. That's turned up. There's been a lot from Eastern Europe have been in the sort of 20 to 50 range. And there's actually a paper which looks at the historic THC levels in hemp foods on the German market from 1996 through to 2020. And consistently, there was a lot of hemp seed oils that had between 50 to 100 milligram of THC. That was standard back in the late 90s. Some of them were up to 150 milligram. That's 150 parts per million. But if you're measuring total content and you're taking a few spoons at a time, is a cannabinoid-rich product. Some hemp seed oils have had up to 2,000 milligram CBD in a litre. It's such a good value way to get litre. But if you're going to set these rules at 7.5 and 10 maximum, you have to put the seeds through an extensive washing cleaning process where it's over cleaning than necessary. And yeah, you've got your internals of the seed there, you're getting your fat, but why have extra processing costs to remove some nutritional benefit that was always consumed in history? We should be making the case that was historical consumption.
Yeah, well, is it not then, as you said, to provide context to any cannabis novice here? This bit of my hair is doing my tits in. Sorry for anyone listening that's just hearing me complain about it. I can't even feel it because the camera's reversed. It's back there somewhere. Anyway, to provide context, is the seeds obviously themselves don't produce cannabinoids. The casings that they are found in. So when if you've ever then grown cannabis yourself and you've had that dreaded moment and you've gone, oh no, and you find the seed casings, it's like a sugary sort of waxy sort of little thing. And yeah, they've got trichome production on that. So you'll find traces of these terpenes of the cannabinoids as well. And so, yeah, historically, they wouldn't have had the filtration systems, nor would they have had necessarily the reason to control it. I mean, ultimately, until the latter part of the 18th century, cannabis wasn't really prohibited and broken into different things. What was hemp, and it wasn't scientifically broken down. It was basically taxonomy. It was, what does the leaf look like? What is the structure? Where did it come from? That's good enough. Stick it in the field. Will it work? Boom. And so the products will have varied greatly. And I would argue that, yes, cannabis seed oil, or as we call it, hemp seed oil in this, is a complete protein, as we know, a complete balance of the essential and non-essential amino acids. But as you said, the added inclusion of these other terpenes and the cannabinoids, I would say historically, that's where we're going to have gotten a lot of this from. So although you've got the nutrition and the medicinal use on one side of it, I suppose it's that wellness bridge in the middle. It's people were consuming it as a food, but yeah, they were by proxy getting a medicinal benefit.
That's the thing. In a good, let's say a sort of raw, without too much washing, you can have detectable levels of myrcene and beta-carophylline as well present. They're in there. Some researchers have mentioned specifically that they actually could be a lot more responsible for the overall outcome of the health benefits than they've been given full credit for. And then you can look at cultures like in China and places where they have long living populations that historically have consumed a lot of hemp foods, hemp seed oil, cannabis seeds, which those varieties which they were growing for fiber, for seed industrial textile use, they were actually often THC dominant plants they had over there. So a lot of people have the perspective that the plants that were used for fiber and hemp production were always CBD dominant, and that's not always the case. There's analysis from the late 90s of a hemp seed oil from South Korea, which had 1,500 milligram of THC in a litre. So that's 1.5 milligram THC per mil. So your 10 mil spoon is getting 15 milligram of THC in a 10 mil spoon of hemp seed oil. And that was just from seeds being pressed from THC dominant fiber varieties where they haven't gone through an extensive washing process. And that's more, that seems to be omitted from the history story.
So it's interesting because this is something we've discussed again at sort of events and something we discussed at Beyond the Green quite recently when we were talking about this. About then, so what is sort of the mechanisms going on? My theory is that ultimately we reckon the THC production and obviously even sort of flavonoids are a function of environment. So you can increase flavonoid production by changing the environment in which you cultivate the plants in. So you can shock them to heat to go to more reds. You can obviously cool them to go more purples. You see this then with later harvests and people playing around. You can obviously then include this into genetics, but it seems to be more of it's a mechanism than it is an internal sort of thing. Whereas then the cannabinoid production seems to be an internal thing that you can through selective breeding improve, but that seems to be mechanistic of UV rays. So obviously a lot of the Asian countries as a peninsula, because of the way it's risen in the mountainous collision of the tectonic plate above it, that's quite high altitude. So of course the cultivars would then be higher in THC. So then what's currently going on there, because there's a revolution currently occurring in places like Thailand and wherever else. They're creating a hemp industry. And this is for me where it'll lead on to this conversation about what the hell is a hemp industry? Because I mean, they've got a cannabis industry, not what we would consider a hemp industry, you know?
So actually, before I forget, I'm going to send you a photo, Simpa, and you can pop it up on the screen just now of a Scottish, we'll send after, you can include it in the show there, but a Scottish hemp seed up close with the trichomes covering it. And so you can see, how much seed is in there. You see the trichomes. The seeds are sticky when you take them out and, you put them in for pressing. Some of that carries through unless you extra wash it off. But so back to the hemp terminology. And this is something I was wanting to discuss as we've discussed many times. And I feel we need to get in. We're just getting into that section for your viewers now. We need to cover that. So I know a lot of people have an issue with the term hemp and think it's, let's say, not helpful or not accurate. And then the way hemp gets used as being something different from cannabis, and the confusion of it's sort of similar and it's sort of different. What's the story? The most accurate description I have come to feel satisfied, because I can't find any other example that holds true without an anomaly or some other exception to the rule. And that would be that the way we use the term hemp now is a fairly recent political construct to describe the non-narcotic use of the cannabis plant. And that's the most accurate description I can give of what hemp is. It's the use of all the other parts that haven't been used for medicine or drug narcotic use. The other parts of the plant, the actual plant itself, there is no way to completely split it up. People say, it's under 0.2 or it's under 0.3%. I mean, we're growing Finola variety up here in Scotland, which is a hemp variety developed in Finland from two North Russian landrace varieties. Went into to develop it. It looks like a CBD auto-flowering type plant, and it's been recorded at 0.6 THC in Sweden. It's been at 0.35 in the UK and things. So there's this variability that that description that it goes over 0.2 or 0.3, now it's cannabis and not hemp, that doesn't hold true. And then the other side of it, you have cultures around the world where they're clearly growing cannabis for medicinal or drug use, such as like the hand rubbing of charas, but they're doing that from plants that they're also using for seed and using the textile. So you can't say that was a hemp plant. That was a cannabis plant that's also using what we call hemp, but the hemp terminology covers the non-narcotic use of the other parts of the cannabis plant. When we look back through the genetics, it's really interesting. So if you go back to the 90s is where the sort of selection process came in to make what's known as the approved variety list of hemp varieties, permitted low THC cannabis varieties that are approved to be grown in Europe. Goes back to the 90s. Now, at the time, if you look up there's a traditional Italian fiber variety known as Aletta campana, and some analysis of it in the 90s, and we'll pop it up on the screen, I'll send it to you. There's about 100 samples on there. 5 of the samples are over 2% THC, and it's a traditional Italian hemp variety. A lot of them are in the sort of 0.6 THC, 1% CBD. But the interesting thing is, when you look back to the sort of the 70s and early 80s of seizures of drug type cannabis, both in Italy and the UK, Denmark, there's figures. There is across the board a lot of some surprisingly low numbers than we would expect. Now, I'm kind of mashing up two different stories here, but we've spoken this one out before, and a lot of the viewers have the big issue with the way the terminology of a skunk gets thrown around. It's terrible. We need to clear skunk out of the UK conversation. It's a complete nightmare what's happened there. And we've got Professor David Nutt. He's banging on about skunk in his new book and telling people that traditional varieties were down in the 3-4%, whatever. And there is a lot of analysis down there. But what's really surprising is when you look at seizures on some Italian islands and Denmark from late 70s, early 80s. And there's a whole bunch of plants that were really like 1% THC, 1.5%, sort of 2% or so on maximum. And I'm thinking, like, if that's what was being grown, and they were using as so-called illegal cannabis, and then the hemp fiber variety type is also producing such levels in the 90s, it really muddies the water, as you say, on where that history was. And where the UK used the term Indian hemp, going back to like the 1850s, and O'Shaughnessy discovering it and bringing it back to the UK. That was obviously mainly THC dominant plants, which was, of type ganja, also of type charas, hand rubbing, slightly more wild type, which was also used for textile use in a lower grade of output. Yeah,
I mean, you learn about like bang as well. So the drink of different preparations, and then that's when the first started looking at, or at least theorizing, sort of how breaking it down through different consumption methods was yielding different results. And that was kind of, I suppose, the kickstarting of at least the European understanding of how cannabis sort of begins to work, the beginning of how cannabis works,
Yeah. So it just seems there was that focus put into taking these traditional cannabis varieties, of some which would have been optimized towards terpene, medicinal drug use, to do maybe more on the THC ratio dominant, and other varieties which were lending themselves more towards fiber production, which still at times had higher THC levels. It seems from that point there was, this effort to do this selective breeding to only permit the, under 0.2% or 0.3, whatever it was at the time. And that's become our current understanding of hemp, but it's not accurate of what was actually before.
So it comes not out of science, it comes not out of a collective conversation where we, bring together our best data and make our best guess and go, all right, this is consensus evidence-based science, we'll move forward with this. We're basically still stuck as a hang-up of, again, that marijuana with the H tax. Because ultimately what they did by going, there's this marijuana, this is the bad bit. That thing we're growing and part of the war effort and all the way, it wasn't part of the war effort yet, but would ultimately become part of the war effort, and was still quite heavily used in agriculture, although there was obviously influenced by people like William Randolph Hearst and the DuPont family and others who had obviously vested interests in a cessation of a mass scale low THC cannabis industry. But yeah, once they introduced this tax, it then basically for the first time forced this arbitrary line of definition. And so then everyone around the world, because it ultimately became part of the eradication program through the UN Single Convention, was based on this document and understanding. And so again, their arbitrary figures that became the global staple were based ultimately, I would have to state or theorize, from their own varieties, surely. Because they would want to then benefit themselves, whereas then this is, as you've just discussed, doesn't really fit an Asian model. So it's then quite a horrible reality that we've lived through for 70, 80 years, in which they've put people to death in their country for hemp, what they would understand as hemp, but we've gone, we know that's marijuana, and then we're going, well, it's all cannabis, buddy, and we're all just stuck in the middle. And this is why, again, I have an umbrance with the term of hemp. I'd quite like to see if it even said hemp cannabis. Even if there was just a clarifier. But I get what you're saying about the non-narcotic use, but then we've got obviously a massive movement now with certain organizations and governing bodies here in the UK pushing for the right to extract CBD from hemp varieties grown in the UK and an increase of the THC limit to 1%. In doing that, they would be, as far as they're concerned, extracting narcotics from hemp, but it's not cannabis. So they could still then, from my opinion, demonize and vilify, creating this negative space for others to be pushed into.
No, it doesn't need to be seen like that. No, it's just seen as the easier form to get through something decent on a lighter touch regulation in a way that you wouldn't get I'm not. Let's say they got that across the UK, that raising the limit to 1% and dropping the need for the industrial license and being able to facilitate that growth of the industry. Like, I see that as valid, as that doesn't have to be taken as in tandem of then it's a separate space of cannabis. It's a separate space of cannabis, but it doesn't necessarily immediately equate to what you're saying further. Just like
it doesn't.
I mean, there is the separation in perspective of the industrial use of some kind, lower form, and then high THC at the other end. Well, so we're just trying to stretch the what's permitted under the industrial side, and actually on the development of the industry. Like I was one of the main catalysts, I would say, of getting the 1% through there to the front, because originally it was going to be 0.3%. The maple tree paper and all this that came out was ready to go and I was in there at the last minute, and literally the communications were like, this is laid out for the final draft. I don't know if we can change this. I was like, look, we need to get this to 1%. And this was in at the last minute. Now, I completely get your point of this, the separation, but I see it as valid, and what it would allow for the vision, like we see, is that defeating novel foods, allowing whole plant extracts from the low THC varieties of cannabis that can be grown with less regulation to be extracted without further regulation and red tape to go into products like we've been importing from other countries and spending a lot of money doing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then we could build on the local provenance of the product, Don't strip it down. Like, if you think you're going to be turning it into CBD isolate or distillate, you can forget the future of extracting, and just a waste of time extracting anything and growing it in the UK. Just be imported. It's like the difference of, I always say the CBD whole plant hemp argument is kind of what I'd say is like vitamin C and orange juice. It's like there's vitamin C in orange juice, but orange juice is not the supplement vitamin C, and it's not the prescription vitamin C either. It's orange juice that contains that. And likewise, if you were buying a product, let's say you're buying some orange marmalade from somewhere in the mountains of Spain. Well, fair enough. That's got something unique to it, and you're getting your orange marmalade from the mountains of Spain. You're not interested in your purified vitamin C white powder coming from the mountains of Spain and refined down to a purified white powder of vitamin C. So I see the sort of parallel for the CBD industry, and we'd like to see that develop, of having the farms being able to extract and, harvest the flowering tops up to 1% and have those available as for other various use in tea and tobacco replacement, and all the low regulation end of the cannabis spectrum, which I also see in the bigger picture of, let's say, your interests of how you don't want to see the stigma of the complete package of cannabis, which I fully support. I see this unfolding actually of what the hemp industry has done. It's been like an exposure therapy to the nation for the ingrained trauma they've been subjected to about cannabis, the word, the stigma, seeing the leaf. I remember working with a designer for products in 2016, and he thought he shouldn't put the cannabis leaf on it because I don't know if any shop will be happy having it on the shop shelf or whatever. And then, you know, it's, you know, just shortly after that, it became a big boom. It's now everywhere. I
was going to say, go down your average health and beauty aisle at a supermarket and watch all of the mainstream health and beauty companies cashing in.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was more of I'm grateful for the response you gave, actually, because it covered another point, but it was more back to your definition that then at some point the individuals that if they won this goal, they would then be extracting, and potentially if they're then going to use that mechanism to produce CBD product that then would go towards prescription use. If it then into the medical market, would there be a drawn line? Because then would it then be a wellness product? Because then if it is, my other worry there is that then not just skirting down another one of those lines? It's moving the line, but it's still skirting down the line. And I understand the need to have legal industry, but I just feel that the argument I've always made is the continuation of hemp as a term in isolation, separate from cannabis, creates an island in a distance. So while the hemp industry moves forward and gets all this acceptance and can have this position in markets and whatever else, someone who then isn't hemp, it isn't CBD, it's skunk and it's dangerous, it's street weed, it's addictive, and it's got like gang culture and human trafficking and all the negative parts of cannabis are forced into this catch-all term of cannabis, rather than, do you know what I mean? So it's
they are by some, but I would say that's breaking through, Simpa. I do think that's starting to change with the international picture that people are sort of being exposed to and the wider sort of understand. I do think there is change definitely going on there. And I think the benefit is in, rather than holding off to the full cannabis space market of edibles being available and people not getting any taste of anything to do with that in the meantime, if we've got that space of what we're trying to build up, the case is actually, so one, I've been fighting it from a point of logic and reason, and the history of consumption of this is just very straightforward, and we'll tackle it from all the angles we can, and then we look at what can be done in the regulatory end as well, you know.
No, I get it. It's like I said, it's the unintended consequence, the false dichotomy that is created is a subconscious consequence of it being separate. You know what I mean? It's the same argument I've had for a long time about the usage of medical cannabis, but there's been, I feel that I've had quite some victories in certain circles to move towards more of prescription cannabis. So then it's what you're doing is you're prescribing cannabis, or at least even medicinal, the prescribing of medicinal cannabis, because then medicinal is the medical use of, rather than creating a separate term of something that stands alone. Yeah. And so again, I see that ultimately, there could be steps from this is the 1%, the extraction from flowers, normalization of consumption of production, etc., seeing if the benefits of that economically, socially, ecologically, environmentally, and then that leading towards another mechanism. But what I fear for is that every day that takes, every week that takes, somebody's door goes off. Somebody has to move because of their grow being compromised. Somebody loses access to something that could benefit their life or could stop them going on to a different substance or into a different sort of chapter of their life. And it's the transparency I want to see. And ultimately, obviously, my opinion is probably slightly skewed in that it's been 2 years since I've been to an expo. Do you know what I mean? Because of all of the pandemic and everything. So I know a lot of people will have done soul searching. Quite a lot of the people I know in the industry out in Europe that I've spoken to and kept in touch with, they have changed their opinions from being very staunch. This is hemp, and we say hemp because you're cannabis and you give us a bad name. You go in the streets and sing songs and hold up banners. We can't deal with y'all. Now they're kind of going, wait, we got here because of you. We're approaching our glass ceiling. We've created these isolate markets. We're now creating all of these novel analogs, and we're skirting all of the laws, but they're getting changed as fast as we can produce these products. And they're going, well, then what the hell do the consumers want? And people still just go, we want cannabis. We want everything. And it is then understanding how the regulations that have been created, the relationships, the networks, and the pathways towards legislative change that have been created through hemp and CBD regulation. I do applaud, and I do understand that will work to move us forward. I guess there's still just a part of me that is frustrated that
Okay.
When it doesn't feel that the average consumer is represented. You know, you guy just sat there, maybe doesn't even listen to this because it's too much information. Somebody that just goes and buys a bag of weed, you know, they want to go. No, but that's still a majority of the population of people that consume cannabis are still people that just buy weed. They don't even care what name it is. They're not. All of that is still too much for them. They enjoy what they do with their little routine. And they're the ones that are most in harm of this. They don't understand how to keep themselves safe for arbitrary detention, for possession. They don't know how to deal with cultivation charges, with driving offences. Do you know what I mean? They don't know how to go about life to protect themselves. And they're just seeing this leaf everywhere and everyone, hemp, hemp, hemp. And they're going, oh, well, I've got cannabis, I'm fine. And so many people get caught up in this dragnet of assuming that the goalposts have moved a lot further than they actually have.
For sure. No, that's valid. So that's completely valid, and I wouldn't see it as, like I said before, complete black and white of how that separates. So this is a negative immediate consequence. What I would say that, and like I will do, speak the truth as I know about it, and I would say that more honesty from everyone who's involved, who can give that across the board, you know, that I'm represent the Hemp Association, you know, low THC, always below 0.2 THC, you know, I'll point out to you that, other Finola has been recorded at 0.6. Yeah, it was over 2% back in history. Yeah, there was 1,500 milligram in a litre of hemp seed oil in South Korea in the late 90s. That's the history of it. And people are sort of surprised at that. And so the thing you've probably seen as well, I've taken a slightly different approach of the energy and input and different angles I've taken to try and sort of contribute to the space, and behind the scenes we're getting research other people to use for their cases in different places. And so, like what I would say, the honesty from our industry. So like my MP, when I tried to contact him as a CBD company and he wasn't so interested in our problems, when he hears about local farmers are all growing hemp, when he goes to the farmers union meeting and the farmers are all talking about why can't we sell the flower and tops of our hemp fields because all the farmers in Europe can, why can't we? Now the MP's interested. And so another thing what I've been working on is I'm doing I'm producing a documentary which is covering a lot of the scene of the Scottish farmers getting into hemp, the work we've been doing with the academics and the nutritional environmental angle, and we've got contributions from around the UK as well. It's not just the Scottish scene. But I take my MP to a hemp field to interview him there, you know, and just what a complete difference of him being there and being with the plant, and you know, so what's the difference with this in cannabis then, you know? And like, I'll give him the honest story, and you can see the difference it makes. So like, there was no quick way for me to get to that one point. You know, I've literally been tackling it from all sides, like get the farmers on board, and then the MPs, he's likes hearing from the farmers and take the MP to the farmer's field. And now he's more interested in, a bit of a slow process and some of the jumps we'd like to do across the scene, but it's all valid, I would say. And folks like myself who are in this position of speaking in the industry in different ways, and in the legal cannabis industry, the low THC cannabis industry, which puts us in a position of where we are speaking to MPs, regulators, folks like that, you know, that I would say that others in this space should be more honest on that sort of explaining of it, like the way I try to do. Like, you know, you said to me before and I wasn't comfortable with the casual use of the term hemp in conversation. Doesn't bother me, whatever. But it did bother me there wasn't a specific sort of description that pinned it down and said this non-narcotic use of the cannabis plant. Like, you know, I spent time thinking about that after we'd spoke before to try and get an accurate summary. And actually, if you look in history where these 0.3 levels and things come from, there was some papers, I forget, I think it's probably through the 80s or so, were written, and it came to the conclusion that if the cannabis plant has more than 0.3% total THC and or the THC to CBD ratio was more than 1-to-1, that plant could be used for drug narcotic use. So there was some paper that there's a lot of really dodgy, shabby research papers from the 70s and 80s that have got big holes missing, which you can now fill in from other pieces of understanding that have come in the time since, of course. But there are pieces of like things like that have been written, and so much has just been referenced off of that one point.
It's interesting. I think that as globalization moves, we will have a wider understanding of this. Something that we obviously referenced in passing when we were sort of prepping for this was we now currently stand under the consensus science that there is Cannabis sativa L, and it has a subgenus of Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. Under the Soviets, they got up to about 13. Obviously, a lot of the data and information was destroyed in the collapse of the Union and the independence movements across the former Eastern Bloc. But also, some of that's very worth noting is what Richard Nixon did. And that was basically write to all of the academics and get them to destroy all evidence of cannabis. So as part of the creation of the war on drugs, they actively went to academia to scrub clean any evidence of this. So there was no argument could be presented against this. It was the scourge. So obviously you can imagine some academics, everybody was free willed at that point. You're talking 5 years after the CIA are alleged to have paid for, a couple of 100,000 doses, no, a couple of million doses, sorry, and sent them out to academics across America to just study what happens when you give this new novel thing that we found to people. So yeah, that then has created this black hole, as you say, of information. But as we then get other regions, which we go, oh shit, wait, this country was growing it 300 years ago and they didn't destroy their information. It starts to fill in these holes. And again, it's transparency and honesty. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of elements with vested interests that are trying to be the Coca-Cola, the Starbucks of cannabis. Sure. And we already saw that, as you described earlier, with this conglomeratization movement to be Sure. the white label wholesaler of CBD isolate. Because for a year or two, you were God. You could own everybody. Yeah. But then now as the industry's moved forward, the product demand is changing the market. So now the industry themselves are having to rally for new regulation. But it feels like, I agree with the 1%. I think that's quite a radical movement for the UK, to be honest with you, in consideration of a lot of other countries. But then on the other side of it, I think it's still quite a limited movement without then another foot in toe. We are one beast walking together, foot in foot, and unless the other movement of cannabis can gain some kind of consensus, and it's only done that if there isn't this polarization and accidental demonization of cannabis consumers if they're not a prescribed user or you're not using a hemp product or a CBD product. Do you know what I mean? There is this real defined difference. Yeah, no, I completely get what you're saying, Simpa. Yeah, I just think so. That'd be it. People in space just need to be more honest. If you're doing your thing, do your thing. Don't go and try and demonize somebody else's space just to try and make yours look better. Just do your thing. I think that would be a large part of it, and just be straight up honest about it. That just everything, the way this industry has unfolded, and you're right enough, the way that has moved into the medical space. I completely agree how that difference has been pitched, let's say, because I'm one from my data research, so I get into things and look up the details. But how to you've got a very valid point of the way it's attracted certain players to that space. I'm not sure. What do you want to ask me there on that? That's it. I appreciate your response to that. It's a difficult position to put you in, and for you to kind of concede the ground in this as a gentlemanly discussion, I think is exactly what we need to see. I'm not here to try and flare you. This isn't an act of war. We're trying to parlay between sort of communities here, whereas unfortunately, there does seem to be this shadow cast by vested interest that moves with the times, with the next big thing, Sure. No, so I would,
it bothers me as well, the perception of how it's portrayed of the difference, because then I have these conversations with, you know, MPs and folks like this, and they'll, you know, just be very confused about it. Like, very few of them really have a good understand the specifics. And the CBD confusion has actually rolled into the medical industry in a way of, like we were talking before, of the, let's say, the low uptake in numbers compared to potential patients using for therapeutic use who may access through the clinics. The medical system is actually suffering from the perception that, like, CBD is available. CBD is medicine. CBD is the good stuff. It's what's available in the cannabis plant. So, like, I've heard the story from some who are in the medical industry, when they try and explain to somebody that they're setting up a medical cannabis business, everyone says, "Oh yeah, CBD. I buy that stuff in Tesco." Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, but not that.
Yeah.
or whichever supermarket or mainstream place they're picking it up from, you know. But literally, that's played through on that side, and then they should just be straight up honest about the therapeutic value of the cannabis plant. You know, we were told for years that cannabis flowers would never be able to be prescribed in the UK. And to be honest, it was a change. It was a sort of surprise to see. You know, it's not a perfect system, but let's say the fact that the flowers, with all various issues, have been said from different angles, the fact that they're available, recognised as a medicine, these are special in the UK, was something people didn't think was going to happen. But then there is the perception that they're very different, or something unique, or some unique variety of combination, or some very special, you know, developed under special conditions, everything else bred out, some magical stuff left in variety, you know, and every batch will be exactly identically the same, and that's why you should be getting it from there and why you can't be doing it at home. That was the argument, you know, but then you see that the batches, especially in the flower, they're not all identically the same. Even ones that are on gold, I'd say the more gold standard companies that call them, let's say 22% average or approx, let's say THC, like it could range from 17.6 up to say 24.8. Now that's quite a swing. If you had the 17.6 batch followed by the 24.8, that's going to be a noticeable difference. But I mean, what are you going to do? Titrate the dose, you know, that's it. Or you have to wait to talk to the doctor till the doctor tells you to titrate the dose, you know, but like there's no other outcome of what happens there in that variation. So, I mean, some companies will be honest and say, yeah, there's a slight variation built in, but there is that perception that is sold of it being something vastly different compared to the main difference is that it comes with paperwork that it's legal.
Yeah. Effectively, yeah. This is the argument that's been made by quite a lot of people. If you look at the forums, obviously some of the prescribing clinics try to knock people off and go, "Oh, this is our T22," and it's like, no, that's a Gorilla Glue cultivar that you have bought from Canada. In Canada, they sell that as a recreational cannabis cultivar. Like, what? There's so Again, it's why the language gets so muddy, and it's, again, I respect that people like yourselves are in the rooms having these conversations, but you're kind of handicapped by their understanding and their expectation of how the conversation can go. There is not enough time, nor can you. I mean, I'm lucky enough. Next week we've got Jeff Smith, MP for Manchester. He's my guest next week, and he's obviously he's produced and pushing this medical cannabis access bill. Obviously, I'm hoping by the end of this it's going to be the prescription cannabis access bill, but that's quite ambitious of me. But other than like getting that kind of time with an MP, it's very hard to then impress on them. And even Jeff's going to have obviously a much more of a better understanding of cannabis as the mechanisms of the plant, the taxonomy, etc., than your average MP that's just gone, well, for 15 years I've been told if I say the word skunk at the pulpit, I'll get extra votes. So of course I don't want it. We don't want it here, sort of thing. So it is difficult to then play that game.
So no, I'd say I definitely do my best to get the message in the space across, and I would say that like how it's going to unfold, and actually for the UK of it where it's at, it's actually like, again, as always, just like to see things sort of to a logical conclusion, but with the way the mechanisms work of society and folks involved, that had the UK legalised first early on, or gone the all access adult use route and been one of the global pioneers, they would have done everything wrong about it. Total control, high tax, everything wrong, and then it would take time to figure that out. The fact that we're in the position that to look at it in any credible way, we have to look at international evidence, and we have to learn from the mistakes that have been made elsewhere, including when you tax it too high, what goes wrong, including if you don't let people, have access to other varieties or grow their own at home, whatever the negative consequences are, or like in Canada where the legacy market is continued supplying a lot longer than the invested companies were expecting. So in one way, it's good the UK didn't dive in and mess that up. And actually, on that front, let me throw in this little note. There was we'll see if we can find a screenshot of this one to bring up. But there was a prototype made around 2004 by GW Pharmaceuticals for cannabis medicine delivery system, which included for the inhalation of flowers or oils. And like, if the UK had rushed in early to the flower market, like, this is the route that would have went down. Completely dystopian device with complete secure chambers. Like, the flower would be delivered in a completely unbreakable chamber of sorts that was attached to a device that only dispensed so many per day, and results were sent back elsewhere, or the dosing could be adjusted remotely. Like, that was the 2004 prototype. So Thankfully we didn't go down that road, and we're in the point where the starting point is there's bags of flowers are available, and that's where we're at.
Well, I suppose we're in obviously a postcode lottery across the country as to how aggressive your force is. There are some incredibly successful, now getting incredibly rich CBD flower companies in the UK, where they have cafes, they have shops where they're just openly selling it. Local MPs, local police, no one just don't care. Whereas the next county over, people are getting raided and facing serious jail time because they're not drawing a distinction. The shop owner's going, well, there's less 0.2. I've been told it's hemp. And so these individuals, again, getting caught up in miseducation and information. And I'm a stickler for for wanting to be able to have a standardized language and terminology and nomenclature for things, so that if we can all point to that as our Rosetta Stone, every conversation can happen. But if we keep moving the definitions of these things, that it becomes very difficult to then you get halfway in the conversation and not know what the hell you're talking about.
On the paperwork by the UK government, they don't call it hemp flowers. That's what I'm saying. Hemp is the non-narcotic use of the cannabis plant. It's only the stem, seed, and the stalk is considered hemp, like the UK government considers its cannabis flowers.
So is it then using quite a nuanced interpretation of the word narcotic then? Because this is the same thing with what happened with CBD, because CBD is marketed as non-psychoactive. This is just not true. It is psychoactive. Sure. All things are psychoactive, but it's a nice simplification.
I'm using the terminology narcotic which ranges from medicinal therapeutic through to recreational use, let's say, the non-industrial parts, and that's why the UK government, even if it's CBD dominant, they don't call it a hemp flower. It's still an illegal cannabis flower.
So what is our CBD industry currently? It can't be medicinal by nature, because that would have to be an acceptance of cannabinoids having medicinal value, and if that is to occur, they have to be prescribed.
That's under the wellness category, where it's just a food that doesn't have any claimed benefit and it's not expected to make any significant change to the health, but it can maintain and support your health. That's it. That's what the industry is for.
Love the language that we
maintaining and supporting your health is what the space for the CBD industry is. Then we have the hassle of the novel foods, which is said that these products are like new alien products that need to be treated the same as they're synthetic and put through toxicology trials for no reason at all to prove they're safe. That's where the hair has been split very unfairly, of just leaving that part of low THC cannabis in the foods space. So
It's interesting because they forced the creation of an isolate industry and then judged CBD based on an isolate. And arguably, yes, CBD as an isolate is probably a novel fruit because humans use things as whole plants for the entirety of our history. It wasn't until the arbitrary legislative restriction and changes to the controlling of certain cannabinoids and components within cannabis that we even really started looking at this. We were doing studies. As I said before, we discovered CBD a little bit before. It was probably around the same time, I think, as the opium conventions in the 1920s. But prior to that, people were just like, it's cannabis. It's awesome. Sometimes it's wicked. Sometimes it's less so. And they were really trying to get into it, but it wasn't until the demonization was created because of racist inclinations, vested interests in industry, etc. That, yeah, when it feels like it's a coming together, like we broke apart, rationality and historical knowledge and science and legislative and all these things. And it feels like we're coalescing back together slowly. And I just worry that if we don't fit the pieces back together, exactly what you spoke of before, we're going to end up in a very utopian world. I don't have to surrender to a government body or allow any agency to know how I regulate my food intake. I do not want to live in a legal cannabis system where I have to authorize and go, oh, well, I smoked 4 joints today and this, and it was this. And no, frankly,
sure.
No.
Sure. No. So in that space, in that unfolding, so there's a couple of things that play of interest there that I would say of some of the medical companies that got in early on, and the space is quite busy, and this is quite busy, there's a lot of noise going on, but there's some of them who want to be quite, let's say, hardline in the medicine angle, well separated. And I think there's others who, from a business perspective, have looked at the low uptake of products of consumers and thought, well, adult access use is probably where it's at. We should start positioning ourselves to gear for that as it unfolds in the UK. And an interesting, I was chatting this out with someone recently, trying to further analyze that sort of low uptake for the clinics. And it's easy to just, dismiss of quality problems or people's complaints online or different things. There's a mix of issues. I think a lot of people are not aware there's a range of cannabis products available on prescription. A lot of people are not aware that they might qualify and that any condition, it's not only the few they've heard about on the news as priority, or, they hear that there's only been 3 NHS prescriptions or so. They hear that, and then that doesn't give the impression it's going to be available to them. But I think something that has been overlooked by the medical supply chain, I've been trying to quantify, pin this down. They said that there's like 1.4 million cannabis consumers in the UK using for therapeutically inclined use, medicinally inclined use. And, after 3 years in the prescription, there's only maybe 5,000 people or so, less than 10,000. I think
it's the latest statistic I was given by somebody in the sector, Mike Barnes, was 12,500.
Okay, 12,500. So we've passed that level now. Yeah, so it's up to that. But after it was nearly 3.5 years in, that 1.4 million that's out there that we're talking about, that producers and suppliers had been expecting to have access to, I think a lot of them, and I'm sure you would feel that way as well, that I'd say maybe 80% of that space don't want it through the channels that are deemed as medicinal use. I mean, personally, I feel like the word medicine has been hijacked in its recent terminology. Yeah. It's kind of, okay, well, if you don't call it medicine, that's fine. It's something else in a different space. I don't know what this narrow definition of medicine is you're working with, but I do think that there has been a hijacking of that terminology, in the way the clinical trials are, and just our interaction with health and wellness. And, folks like myself had a bad experience with the health system. We don't have that trust outright that anything about it, either your advice, the supply chain, like some people have had their trust broken to that point where, now I'm not speaking at all for a majority. There's some people with chronic health issues, let's say, get to that point. but of those established therapeutic users, a lot of them want a legal supply access. They don't want that threat of all the consequences of the criminality.
Yeah.
They would like to know it's not contaminated. Outside of that, pretty much just want access, whether that's through the social club model, whether they're allowed to grow their own for therapeutic use, and I think the medical space has slightly underestimated or misjudged. Again, I would say it's middlemen. It's the same middlemen that sold the CBD isolate dream to the investors when sold the 1.4 million that they went and tallied up from somewhere,
Yeah, well, without speaking in a vaguity here, we always speak of the shadow that is large and looms from the monolith here in the UK. And I think that basically the creation of these metadata culmination companies and these analytical companies, they created statistics that still we can't quantify. I'm still trying to break down, I think, the 2018 estimation of how big the UK CBD industry was. And I know some of the biggest players in this country. And I've spoken to them and gone like, you're not covering anything close to these. What are they doing here? Where is this coming from? Where is the speculation for this? And then when I've looked around at other countries that they're potentially organizations that they are linked to in other countries, the data sets that they're creating, you've seen some numbers trip up. I saw something on one of the American sites. I've been out of the news cycle for a little bit with everything that's going on, but I've been trying to catch back up. And I saw this 1.4 million medical users pop up as a number in America. And I was just like, oh, look through the data set of where that come from. And it's potentially it's the same organization that then pushed through here in the UK. So you can see they're selling this market. And then what they do is push players into the market. It doesn't work. The players then go, well, help us. They then create more lobbying to move to the next level. They then push them into that space, take all of their money, create all this fervor on the stock markets now as they're starting to come on board in Australia, Israel, Canada, America, now in London. Obviously, with Brexit, we're trying to re-incentivize and restructure how our financial models are working. And cannabis, laundering dirty cannabis money is going to be a big way of doing that, because it's all going to be about skirting around. So we're going to be quite rebellious to European laws, I think, moving forward, just to make us more attractive to these kind of companies. As I was saying before about the discretion of certain, do I put this on record? I've been given permission to, actually, so I probably will do then, yeah. So I know of then HMRC investigations that resulted in basically the taxman saying, you give us 30% moving forward and you can sell your CBD flowers. You know what I mean? They'd called out a few of the guys that were using loopholes in this country, because we being the British, we would never tax tea. You know what I mean? So tea is 0% tax on it. So they were basically importing cannabis flower to produce it with tea and then selling it by the gram. Mm-hmm. And then when the taxman caught on, it wasn't a raid through the door. It was a look at the margins and the number and go, gives a piece of that. And so I think that's where it's going to be moving sort of forwards. I think a lot of Britain's drug policy is probably going to be similar to what happened as to how we became global drug players in the first place. So basically there was the East India Trade Company out there, and that basically went bankrupt. The British then stepped in and we went, fuck it, we'll have that. We'll take that off your hands. We'll deal with you. And we very quickly discovered that we could use opium and hashish as two things to trade in the Middle East, then in the Far East. Then when we started criminalizing them, we created control mechanisms in the populace and really understood that mechanism. And then for a couple of centuries, we were the global leaders in drug dealing until the creation of these individual sort of cartels that then became more powerful than individual nation states. And I think that little Britain post-Brexit, that's what we're going to look to, become a narco state. Some of our banks are already laundering billions from cartels around the world anyway. There's the HSBC investigation that was revealed the other year. We know there's dirty money, and when there's money flowing, they're going to want their piece. So I can see, actually, it's not going to be because it's the right thing morally. It's not going to be because it'll benefit the global, the collective health of the nation, or benefit our environment or ecology or etc. It's entirely going to be because of the amount of money that they can make from this.
Yeah, it's and to fill various tax holes. That's something. That's the thing that will bring it on quicker than anything else. Literally.
Sorry, I'm laughing at tax holes is probably a term that we are called by people inside the Treasury. I'll just leave it at the tax holes. They'll pay for it.
Yeah. So you know, there is an appetite of looking at this space through the lens of how do we work this, have it successful and make some money from it. That's obviously the regulator's angle of how they're looking at that. And of course you can make all the good points of the money to be saved and things, and that'll be a different department. There's like the people, the department saving is one issue, but the people with the income who have to show, like, that's a different hole to be filled there. And the one thing that's kind of holding back the UK getting on the legalization, even for those who sort of support it but don't understand all the mechanisms required, is the Proceeds of Crime Act needs to be completely reformed in the UK to accommodate the industry. And until they sort that, there was
a very small step made September 2020. It was 2020 when the Financial Conduct Authority, they marginally moved some rules of their interpretation of the Proceeds of Crime Act, which allowed for investment into cannabis companies as long as they were deemed to be medical cannabis companies.
Yeah,
but it's a very sketchy designation when you actually look at it.
Something needed change just to accommodate medicine and research, I think. Yeah, and now it needs further change and untanglement to facilitate the legal market. Obviously, those that are in the power to make those changes want to know that there's something in place for some tax money coming in from that, as opposed to just legalizing it for the good of it and people's access, or the saved money on just the cutting down on everything else that's involved.
It's interesting. There's some really good arguments then to be made for home growers. Your average home grower in the UK pays more tax than Google, than Microsoft, and many of these huge companies combined, yet they trade and make billions in this country. They pay tax on their feeds, on their now ever escalating electricity bills, on their water rates, on their nutrients, on the soil, on the tent equipment. You know what I mean? We're contributing more to these coffers than these giant companies. I mean, at least now, I suppose Amazon and Apple are making movements in America to kind of push for something, because again, corporate greed, they're seeing the future of it. And unfortunately, that anything is kind of better in some ways, as long as it's not then locked in. And that's why I feel I agree with what you said before about we're in quite a unique and wonderful place here in the UK, because we're not now in Europe. Whatever the EU are doing, and believe me, behind the scenes, they are working hard to get this done, we won't immediately become subservient to. We'll have an opportunity through devolution, as well as the other kingdoms, that's the way of describing it, I've said that in a while, of the other countries of the United Kingdom, to been watching Game of Thrones recently. That's probably why I said kingdoms there, guys. So that'll then give us an opportunity to have these micro movements to then exactly what they're doing in the States and America. And so we can trial certain things. So I'm quite hesitant, and I've said for a while now, I'm probably going to be against legalization when it comes in this country, because if they pass it, once it's passed, we're not going to be able to repeal that, because of the mechanism of corruption between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The same people who are going to make that bank in the House of House of Commons passing this are going to end up in the House of Lords to veto this every time we try and fix it. So we'll lose a generational opportunity for legislative reform unless we can kind of get that right reform. And for me, it's deschedulization, and that creates everything for everybody. Because I don't want to go, well, I want my bit and screw you guys. I want us all to have a go at it, because in 10 years, we'll be far further along as a species than we have been in this 100 years of a war we've had against this damn plant. Sure.
No, I completely get your point. I think in the unfolding reality, and those who are involved in how we can try and influence it, and I think I'm optimistic the UK has the chance to get some middle ground that could actually work for everyone, and give all the various parties involved the various wee bits of the pie and their headlines as to how it's a success for them. And that would be along the lines of, like, again, back to Professor David Nutt there. I was surprised he has put the case to the government of pushing for total state control of being the best model. Now, doesn't sound good, total state control. It doesn't sound like something be supporting off the bat. You have to see fine details what exactly he's talking about there. But if you were to look at, say, the Uruguay model, which in some ways I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these details here, Simpa, but of the Uruguay model, I believe they have sort of state control of the supply, where there's a pretty limited range of supply, and they have 15%.
Like five cultivars.
Like 5 varieties or so, and a limit on the cap on the THC. But is it right that people at home or in the social club model are flexible to do other varieties? Is that correct? Or are they also limited to those?
I think, yeah, it's the 5. It's been a long time since I've looked at this, but so yeah, I believe it is. It's 5 cultivars that are available from the pharmacies, and that's the state-run system. I think it's not too dissimilar from Canada in that the state will then deputize through some system and give authority to a body to cultivate those cultivars. They will then obviously be checked and regulated and then prescribed. I think there's a prescription limit of 30, 60 grams a month, whatever it is. There is the social club models, which I think is a little bit more lenient and less enforced, because I mean, you've got to then consider Uruguay's resources ultimately anyway. And they were one of the first movers really through this. Obviously, you had Colorado and Washington make their moves first, or announce them and vote them in 2012, but didn't come into fruition in 2014. Whereas this was on the books at around about sort of 2014, but was the first recognized country in violation of the UN Single Convention. I think they had to do what they had to do because of the climate. I think there is great space for reform now, but I also think that they're kind of future-proofing themselves against this race to the bottom that we're seeing at the minute, which is these global suppliers. The move into Colombia was very popular for a little while because they've got, I think, production down to 0.04 pence or whatever the regional cent is for that area per gram. And so now they're looking at, they're in Uganda, sorry, too many U's. And they're looking at all of these really quite impoverished regions that have actually been drastically affected by global drugs policies and foreign policies as a consequence of resource restraint and restriction. Then they're going to go, oh, well, we'll set up this industry and you guys will get all this and you'll get that. And then 6 months, 12 months, the licenses are all sold to third parties. They're all bought up. The economy is deliberately collapsed so that they can then get in cheaper labor. And it's becoming sinister. I mean, it's quite worrisome.
Sure. I mean, I would think there's like a certain dynamic of that's it's throughout society at a high level as that goes on. And from my angle, I see having a seat in the table in some of the processes of what we're trying to influence them in a positive way as possible and get the information forward to hopefully at least set the parameters of what the choice range might be, hopefully set it as good as possible, get the points through on the data from the case examples from elsewhere. And I would say that, of course, there's a compromise. There's a compromise for both parties. The compromise for the ones who've got the levers to pull and want all the money, they want to own all the money, but they know that there's negative consequences when they go wrong or tax high or anything too much. So, those who would like to own the supply chain and have all the income, have the evidence of what goes wrong should they try to, high tax, own everything. So they have to look at that evidence. So on that side, of those who are in the position with political levers, looking at the money side, they see that as a compromise of, the social model, the home model, any other, let's say, the more appealing parts to the folks on the ground. They see that as a compromise on their side, but based on the evidence of what there is, that's one that they need to consider because of the negative consequences that will be pointed out. I would then think that on the side of the folks who want the home grow and the social club access model, I would think the reasonable trade-off would be that if that can be plugged in reasonably into the system and the social model is built in a way of, all being sensible and good access has been sort of a lot of cases put together, based on the Spanish model and evidence that would work, that would be there's some way in that as the folks who want the choice, want the access, want the community model or the home grow, whatever, if that's built in, and let's say on the supply end, there is all those things that go wrong with the, owning it all, running companies down, buying them over, handing licenses to somebody else. Like, there's going to be stuff like that go on in the high level of all big supply chains where there's money and interest. And I would think if like I mean, it's all been making the case sounded like, saying David Nutt's angle or state control sales is anything I would be writing up as a proposal on that front. But let's say if those in power need some line like that on their headline, if they need to say that we've legalized and we control the supply chain of whatever, but they also have the social and the other model built in, that I see as a possible compromise of how that could unfold. But I hope it ends up a lot better, and I hope the small craft producing market is well built into the system. That is something. Now, whether that's in a space separate from only tied under the social club model, there should be the social model, the craft model of business, and the large business is going to happen one way or another.
The ubiquity. I mean, Transform, one of sort of the UK's oldest continual drug reform organisations, have just released the 3rd edition of How to Regulate Cannabis. I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to have a peruse of it, but I did the second version, and they presented a few different sort of models. And I think it's the diversity, as you say, of alternatives, rather than just going, well, you either continue what you're doing or you do this. It's even inside of that, it needs to be broken down into a multitude of different aspects of how it's going to affect every facet of our day-to-day lives. And that isn't to say that we drag our heels for the next 15 years in doing it. My argument would be, has anybody died that we can prove definitively? No. All right, let's create a period of 18 months, 2 years of strict state governance and guidance on this, allow for all of the different industries to emerge, allow them to follow basic hygiene, sanitation, et cetera, all commercial regulations and rules and taxes paid, and just observe these mechanisms and then see the consequences instead of them postulating and going, well, we think this, we think that. It's like, well, no, you're still using a basis of ignorance. You're still using the same racist, classist, cultural biases that presented and created the Misuse of Drugs Act and have continued this stupid system that we're in. It needs a reset, but we can't really. There isn't almost an unbiased body to observe this. This is the problem. I mean, I'm incredibly biased. You know what I mean? I obviously I've had the experience I've had with drugs, and that's the experience I've had. It's led me to believe that it's far better to legalize and regulate the access of all substances than keep them criminalized and allow certain individuals to violently control and regulate that trade. But that's an extreme argument to some people, whereas then extrapolate down into the pockets of this, as you were talking about, it's most people are going, well, it has to be this magically produced stuff, or it's these demon kids on bikes that are shooting each other, stabbing each other. And it's such a stupid, simplistic argument. And I'm struggle to see, although I think we've covered some wonderful topics in this, how we sort of move forward. I think that, yes, the UK is in a wonderful position, but how do we convince those people when I believe that it's the Upton Sinclair quote that I always come back to, of how can you convince a man to believe something when his job is contingent on him not understand something when his job's contingent on him not understanding it. I think that's true of a lot of these politicians. They're bought and paid for. The companies have already done their lobbying. So when individuals like myself come along and go, we radically want to do this and change all this, they're like, we can't deal with that. Where's the money in that? Where's the, you've got to outbid this guy. It's going to cost you $1 million more than he paid me, and I'll get on your side. Sure.
Yeah, that's you're right.
That's politics, though, isn't it?
You're right on how that works, and just say that I do my best to let's say just be in this unfolding process to try and do what I can with getting the right points forward at the right time. But I will say that, but across this sort of couple of years or whatever it is, I've been more working in this industry. Like, there are those little things can look back on, see we're emphasizing the piece of data. There's a little simple thing of 1% being discussion and not 0.3. Like, literally it was going to be 0.3. And if a paper that came out with 0.3, it would have just been me talking about 0.1, but we got it in there. Now everyone's talking about 1%. So to the right information at the right time. And like on the food standard side, like it was supposed to be all wrapped up, done and dusted, novel foods for hemp products off the shelves. Like we've got we've held off enforcement in Scotland on whole plant products and kept the door open to try and make the case to develop this industry. Now some of it's tied up under the Home Office, but at least like make the case of the potential and show the will, and have others involved in showing their will to hopefully, resonate and get those changes needed. So yeah, it's I completely, let's say, understand some people who just avoid the whole process of the system and do their thing, but it is unfolding, and you can make a difference by being involved and getting something forward at the right time. So where it's going to come down to that is where the right set of circumstances come together. They get the Proceeds of Crime Act reformed, they look at some model, they look at how much tax it's going to bring in to plug their hole, and then it's going to go forward with various people in the conversation, and we'll look at different models, and there'll be sort of parameters that will go forward that the discussion sets as to how it's going to go forward from that point, as each step of it unfolds. So just doing the best to influence those little things at each step of the way is the best way I know how I can try and contribute on that side.
Yeah, I think you made that case eloquently for others to do so. And I think that articulates, I guess, a lot of my work, which I generally call myself a troublemaker. But I'm obviously involved in quite a lot of different things, and I'm just there to kind of go, well, yeah, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I think it's good that I've developed, or I've been, same as yourself, like accepted into those spaces. And I think that the work you do is being invaluable. The fact that you've basically kickstarted a low THC sort of hemp industry in Angus is commendable, man. I mean, Christ, it's a lot of people think of Scotland. They're like, now we'll grow up there. It's too cold, too much snow. There's nothing up there.
Yeah, I'll send you a few more photos through. We can throw them up on the screen now. Some nice plants from up here. So I was going, one other little detail on that making change, because as a creative individual interacting with my unfolding environment, like I see what's the opportunities in that space. So the documentary I mentioned, like the reason why I'm doing the documentary is to help move a bit further the pub. Now I know it's around the hemp angle, we're bringing in academics and all that, but to help move things forward a bit further on that side, along the lines of what I realized was, so the director is the guy who directed the US hemp road trip, DJ Neek. And that US hemp road trip, some of the senators said in 2018, it was influential in them voting for the Farm Bill, which, although it's all worked out perfectly, it was an upgrade in their hemp industry. And I saw that the powerful visuals moved things where the data hadn't always done it. And I also noticed that, like in the CBD side of things, that a lot of, let's say, the mainstream consumers have this impression that it's only in recent years, or like the last few years, doctors have discovered this medicinal, potential benefits of CBD, and like how the children with incurable epilepsy who've only had benefits from CBD product. A lot of folks have the perception that that's very like recent trials or recent information. But in 1980 in Brazil, there was clinical trials done with children with epilepsy, and it was like a 90% success rate versus placebo. So, it was clear clinical evidence in children that CBD was working to help them, and nothing happened after that. Like nothing, no follow-on. Nothing happened for 32 years until two parents from Colorado with no medical background went on the internet and the TV to tell the world about giving their child unregulated cannabis extract and how it changed their health. Mm-hmm. That kickstarted this whole, my knowledge and interest in the industry and all what I've done here to get farmers on board, and all how that's sort of unfolded through the world. But 32 years of data was there and no one did anything. And people say, we need data. So I saw that when I got the farm started, I then set up a news piece to be on with one of the farmers on Scottish TV News at 6 p.m. So he's in the northeast of Scotland, standing there with big cannabis plants behind him growing, and say how he's very happy, didn't know it was going to grow so well, how it's going to grow so well up here. the day after that broadcast, there was so many phone calls I received from farmers, and it was the same conversation repeating on and on. Oh, I saw you on the news last night there. I didn't know we got hemp grown in Scotland. I've been thinking about that for a few years. Like, I've looked into it. I know the benefits, and they start rattling off the data and all the reasons why they want, but they didn't do it, and they knew about it. But now that they saw there was somebody else is doing it or someone they recognize, they're like, oh, we want to join in. We're going to do that now. So I saw that, they were farmers. They had the land. They knew they could grow it. They knew they could get the license. They knew the benefits. And, due to whatever the neighbours might think of them, or they don't want to be, the neighbours all of a sudden brand them as hippies for going out there and being the only ones who are growing a hemp field, what are you up to? It just didn't happen. And now that I see putting the one farmer on TV, that did more to change and get more on board than like anything you could have said. So I saw that, I tuned into that. So that's why I was doing the documentary to further things. And I will also take that approach forward in this unfolding space. And like I said to you, I feel that the wellness space is greatly, just the wellness in the cannabis space is not well represented in the perception of the space between the sort of CBD industry and medicinal cannabis for very specific limited use on specific dosages, So there's that sort of wellness space that I also hope to help bring into the perception as this unfolds.
And hopefully this documentary will help do that. And I think the work that you do, whether it be as part of the Scottish Hemp Association or, the various groups that you're in with the CIC and other organizations that you champion, I think you're doing that, man. You're doing that for sure. And do you think that, I was just thinking that like the next thing to do is get these 7 farmers together and go, we should probably invest in processing and get themselves as a hub, because again, it's coming. We've got so much arable land across the vastness of the UK, and weed grows like a weed.
Yeah, totally. And I think we haven't considered as well all what we call the marginal land. That's the land that's designated of like low economic or no economic value. It's not a specific land type. It's just currently has no economic value. Should you find an economic use for it, it's no longer marginal land. It's in use. And hemp could grow in there. Low-THC cannabis for industrial use could grow in all those spaces of land we have around the country. Like I was quite surprised at how well the Finola variety was growing up here. Say it's the North Russian landrace genes background is different from the Southern European fiber hemp type varieties. And even when it was in spots of sort of low sunlight, kind of behind trees and shaded patches, like it had great vigor. I was really, up north of Aberdeen, way up in north of Scotland, next to the sea, getting strong gales and cold wind, and it was looking good and healthy, So.
Like I said, anyone that's done a bit of indoor growing knows you need a good few fans. So we liked a bit of a breeze, and there is that sort of intrinsic intelligence of the plant that it kind of knows. Well, we'll push a bit more water down there. The interconnected nature between sort of cannabis and mycelial networks and the mycology, we're really only just starting to scratch the surface. So that a lot of those lands, I would like to see cannabis rewilded. It obviously the way to offset then all the youngins, do a day trip up there and whatever, is just you create that other market alongside of it so we can leave it. So in several generations, we can see, as we've spoke of sort of previously off camera, about sort of these generational drifting and these, it just exploring its own genetics cycle on cycle, it then being allowed to rewild. I think it would be amazing to see then what the cannabis that would become a back crossed or a new created landrace would look like, what it would feature.
Yeah, so we'll throw a few more photos in here if we could put them up. I'll send you through to show a few interesting phenotypes turning up in our fields here. So that's an interesting thing, that Finola, which is, you would think, a very stabilized industrial variety developed in 1995, there was still unique phenotypes would show up, and there was different terpene profiles. There was like the main classic one, and then there was 2 or 3 other variations, and there was differences in morphology. This one plant, I got a photo of here where the autoflower gene had failed to trigger, and it was just vegging and continuing while the rest of them were on with their flower, and it was going to be going far too late in the season. There's another few phenotypes we'd come across that looked identical to like the Dr. Grinspoon, what we'd say the extreme sativa, narrow leaf, drug long flowering variety. And got a photo of that there that just, it looks completely different from the other ones in the other morphology, and they'll have a different content. And there's a few other varieties, both with the purple hues, different terpene profiles coming through, different morphological structures. So it seems to defy our want to try and stabilize it. Like given the slightest opportunity, it's going to pop off some unique expression. And I was surprised to find it. And actually, it was great fun to go, like, you know, walk a few long hemp fields, just wandering around looking for interesting phenotypes and like finding some, you know, unique standouts off the track. So
yeah, exactly that. I remember I was taken up by the guys at the Goods and saw 250,000 plants they had in Rhondda, and you could just see these distinctive patches of like 4 different colors, just slight offset hues. One was really dark, but the other 3 greens, just an offset where you could really start to identify the difference of them. And yeah, then the taste of them was very different ultimately when they were dried. But yeah, you see this of cannabis wants to innovate. It wants to move forward. It wants to adapt. It's an adaptogen. It's the reason that cannabis, I think, has moved so well is because of its interconnectivity with the rest of its ecology. So it works amazingly well as a companion plant for the vast majority of things. It works incredibly well to create mycelial relationship structures that then allows it to create waterways and nutrient pathways to gain nutrients from places that you wouldn't expect it. You know, I mean, it's kind of, we've seen cannabis basically grow in places where nothing else will. You know, it's in a very unusual and powerful plant that just, it wants to be here. So I think us trying to restrain it, we stress it. And the natural response of cannabis when you stress it is to produce more THC. Yeah. So all we're ever doing is making these hot fields. People are then going, putting all these seeds down, putting all this work in, and then fucking up something about a nutrient intake or about something else that they're adding to it. The plant's having a reaction, and all of a sudden they've lost millions of pounds worth of a crop. I mean, they're already losing the potential millions of it because they can't use the vast, superior, profitable economic part of it. But then they lose the wait. They don't. Yeah, would you lose the rest if you then grew hemp under license as 0.2, but you then strip the flowers? Because there's various studies suggested somewhere between 5 to 11% cannabinoid production will be left on an average stalk.
Sure. Did you say 5 to 11% of the total, or just of general? I think a lot of stocks are down more in the sort of lower end, or 1%.
I think this was where I'm mixing this up with a cannabis study, not a hemp study. Sorry.
Yeah. They can have quite a range stocks like that for sure. But actually, so in the US for the harvest for the flowers, they have the issue of destroying the crop, or other places in Europe. But I think in the UK, it's just if the crop is over, it's just recorded. I think that's what it is. So if you grow Finola or whatever variety and it goes high, that's just taken a note of. But if the same variety does it 2 years in a row with a significant number, then it's like removed from the approved catalogue. I think it's so I think it's like often there's like one here and there get recorded, and we'll just keep an eye on that one, whatever. But yeah, I mean, the evidence shows it vastly adapts. There was studies done in the Eastern Europe, I think it was in Slovenia, where they grew the same varieties of hemp 2 years in a row. And there was one variety of hemp that the second year it doubled its THC. It went from like 0.3 up to 0.6. And then there was another that went from like 0.3 down to 0.15. So it was like across 2 seasons, one doubled and one cut in half. Don't know what the other factors were, but that's what the seeds did anyway, you know, so.
Yeah, I think we're going to be forever. I think, we have to have this coalescing moment of coming together, of acceptance, and instead of changing the rule for one, and we just change the law for all, because otherwise we're just going to be chasing our own tail here to infinity, because the plan is, it's like a smash in the atom, man. We just keep breaking down to another one and another one, and another one. Go, oh, we theorized there might be this, so we're going to spend all this money to find this, and then there might be this. And it's like, I get the need for that, but ultimately there's also got to be some point of acceptance of the other shit around the world. In this instance, the harms of prohibition. Millions of people are still at the risk of having their lives upended, themselves incarcerated, and a lot of countries still murdered by the state for simple possession. it's frustrating that, again, it is such, to me, cannabis is almost everything, because it's become so all engulfing of my life, because it's everywhere and it is represented in such a multitude of different cultures and facets and guises that we have to try and remain humble ultimately to not get too lost in, well, this is what weed is. It's like, no, that's what weed is to us, or to you in that moment. To others, it's the food that keeps them alive. You know, it's the narcotic that funds their kids going to school. It's the thing that allows them to walk, to sleep, to, you know, we haven't even talked about like prophylactic use or any of that. Like, again, we've been on 2.5 hours of my imaginary watch. I don't know why I did that. We've been on 2.5 hours. And there's so much that we haven't touched on because of how diverse of a subject matter this really is. So I think I'd like to go to my 2 fun questions, kind of wrap this up, because I think, for the average listener out there, thank you folks for sticking through with this. I think you've learned a hell of a lot. I know I sure have already. One of the fun questions I wanted to ask was, do you find there's a crossover between sort of your previous work of being an entertainer and sort of professional sort of musician and what you do now? And like, would you have any intentions of deliberately combining the two?
Good question. So on let's say my background, from outside of doing the shows, there's like quite a lot of time in public interaction and things would come up, with events and parties and cocktail circuit and dinners and all that type of stuff, and hosting dinners and things like that, for being the guy that's doing the show on the stage, and you're hosting a dinner with the important folks there and things like that, So I've spent a lot of time being comfortable, let's say, just talking to a lot of people across the board, and across cultures and across all different different walks of life. And I think from a way of communicating, I've tried to bring in, it's a combination of, it's my passion from my experience, the need for it, but it's also a passion for the research and the sort of the truth that's around it. And from a background of dealing with people and communicating, let's say, from a stage where you learn in some ways to deliver points, to get them across, or to try and make your case. I think some of that has come through to be useful, let's say, personable and conversational introduction to new environments, to talk through a subject. So I would say there's that angle. And then on the music side, like I fully intend to also do more with my music career in life as well. Like I see this has been it's been an extra intense period, I'd say, this last while. It's been on the beat quite 24 hours a day on this, since the lockdown. So it has been quite intense. And so I keep in shape with my music of what I do, and I play and do all that. I've not just don't have the plans, or I've not taken on making plans of trying to be going out since the whole lockdown situation. Just psychologically, I just felt like it was a big thing to be trying to set something up and then it'll all be let down and cancelled, whatever. So I've been quite busy on this beat here in the industry in quite an intense way. But I fully intend of other things to be doing in music as well. And as you were asking of tying up the two, I've thought about it for sure. And there's the potential there. Well, but there's potential different ways how that could unfold, actually. But we'll see. I'm not sure. We'll see.
It's something that Jim Fox brought up, UK Championship beatboxer, and it's something he's looking into of sound healing. And obviously, sort of with what you're looking at with sort of cannabis, I mean, I think there is something to that. We're starting to understand that the more as cannabis gains acceptance, anything that was tied up with the hippie bow, that anybody that if you smoke cannabis and whatever you spoke of, that was tied up with this hippie, holistic bullshit, whatever, go away sort of bow. And now they've kind of untied it and they're going, oh, cannabis. They're going, what else have you got in that basket of wonders? And this is obviously where we're going with psychedelics and whatever else. But I think these are the things like sound therapies of bathing in nature. We're starting to see a lot more of these studies being published of these interactions between the human body and the natural world, and how we can, address things prophylactically and sort of in an active treatment fashion. So yeah, do you think this is something you'd ever look at with that, or is it more of a born entertainer?
No, along those lines for sure. No, there's different considerations how this could unfold and be tied up together in some ways, but we'll see. So I'm a creative individual, and I'm busy in this space just now. I keep my music up. I like to get out doing some more things to that, and I'm sure there'll be some new things develop as all that unfolds.
Excellent. Yeah, well, you'll have to give us a link after this so I can drop it in the bio below for folks to check out. I suppose I've only got really my last question to ask, although we've kind of covered a little bit of that, but maybe give us a bit more. What does the future hold for you?
So for me, well, say we covered a little of that, but say this period just now, I'm intense on this beat where on the hemp and CBD side, we're in a parliamentary process with the APPG, which is quite optimistic actually. And this has been, again, due to a lot of the energy I've put in the last year or two, communicating with others in the industry, trying to get us on the same page, and this has sort of come together that may see the back to the hemp industry as it should have been in the early days, let's say, on that side. I see the unfolding in this space for the tax money is what they're going to look at, and I'll do my best to get the information in there to help to steer that into something that try and works for everyone, let's say. And on the music front, yeah, I feel I'll get back to a new, I don't know, a new role of some music I'll be working on, whether it's some new ideas, things come together, new collaborative idea for a show like you were suggesting, or other places. I feel that's going to come up in the coming time. Don't know exactly in what way, but I'll be doing something for sure. I'm creative in my nature, and I've got a lot of want to be doing things, and it'll come out one way or another. So.
Let's look forward to seeing how that unfolds. And as I said, I'll include links to your website and whatnot below so people can keep up and catch up with all the things that you've done. Obviously, I think I noted you'd recorded, was it 6-7 CDs thus far, DVD? Like I said, you traveled to like 67 countries.
Yeah.
Quite an impressive career, man. So I do hope people take the time to literally follow the links below and check out Kyle's sound and what he's been up to, man. And check out all the great work that he's doing up in Scotland, because we have a little bit of a shining beacon to the north in that Scotland has some devolved power and the ability to rebel against the damn queen of the south. I can't even tell I've been watching Game of Thrones. Anyway, yeah, Kyle, this has been a brilliant conversation. I've truly enjoyed this, man. So thank you for taking the time to sit down with me, man.
Thanks, Simpa. Really enjoyed talking with you as always, and it's a great pleasure to be here on your show. Thank you.
No worries. Look forward to seeing you later on in the year. But until then, yeah, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you've enjoyed this, folks, and you made it all the way to the end of this 2.5-hour mammoth educational compendium of knowledge, I don't know if that sentence makes any sense, but it did in my head, then please do check us out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where you can help keep the lights on for less than a cup of coffee a week. Check us out on all social media platforms. Help me fight this current shadow ban I'm under for using the dreaded cannabis and the other words that shall not be named on the social media platforms. But yeah, you'd be beautiful and wonderful. Look forward to seeing you next week with the MP for Manchester, Mr. Jeff Smith. Ooh, it's going to be an interesting conversation. Peace and love, folks. Do subscribe and all of that shit below. Peace.